Hello YouTube, Jerry Kirkpatrick here, and thanks for asking. The old schnoz is just coming along swimmingly. Over the last couple of weeks with this last series of videos that I have been putting out, I've been getting a lot of communication from different fellows who are building my bead roller using my plans, and quite a few who are not, and are asking specific questions about how I arrived at certain dimensions and how I went about modifying my bead roller to get it to where it is today. So this video will be a walk around my machine, and for those of you that are building your machine from my plans, I know you don't stay right strict to these dimensions because everybody has a different take on it, and that's great. For those of you who are wanting to start modifying your bead roller, this will give you something to think about as you start thinking about how you want to make the modifications to your machine. And I might mention that if you're thinking about doing anything with your bead roller, Ron Covell has an excellent, it's a 97-minute video on bead rollers, all different types. Being 97 minutes, you can figure there's quite a bit of information in there, and you will find a link to his website down in the description here. Now, before we get started into the meat of the video, I'm going to show you several things that are kind of tips and tricks. Number one, I keep the Allen wrench for the two screws that hold the dies on just hanging on a magnet here. It's out of the way, and it's always right where I can get to it easily. I've already showed you in the last video the two screws and the brass washers that I made that keeps the dies up tight against the flange. And I have a light that I can use on either side of the bead roller. Sometimes you're coming in from one side, sometimes from the other. But this is nice out of the way. It's fully adjustable. I can turn it around. And for an old guy like me, light is key. I also have a foot control that merely turns on and off the drill motor. I'm using a Milwaukee, what they call a hole shooter, right angle, half-inch, forward reverse variable speed. And I have a clip on the back that I've made that keeps the trigger all the way depressed, and I rely on this rheostat to modulate the speed of the dies, how fast they're going through. I get quite a few comments on why I use such an expensive drill motor. Well, just by a key, I can loosen the chuck, slide the drill motor off, and I have a drill motor. It is not dedicated, although this is where it lives most of the time. it is not dedicated to this machine. I have a very useful tool that is not dedicated to any one project, any tool. Anytime I want to use it, I just loosen it, take it off and do what I would need to do, put it back on, and I'm off and ready to use my, my bead roller again. One of the other things is this wrench. I have it set to where the top shaft is tight. Back there it's loose. The shaft is free to move wherever it needs to be. Tighten it down. And one thing that I did to be able to retain this wrench on the machine all the time, I don't have to pick it up, I don't have to go chase it or anything. I drilled and tapped the head of the bolt 1032, and then I use a 1032 screw with a fender washer, and then in between I've put a couple of just number 10 flat washers, and that keeps the fender washer away from the wrench. So even though the screw is all the way tight, the wrench is still loose and able to move freely. So that's a neat little trick that you might try on your machine. So with all those little tips complete, let's get into the machine itself. So I think that one of the very first things that you should approach if you're just starting to modify your bead roller is the base. The base that I show in my plans is just 2 pieces of 1/4 by 3 by 3 angle iron welded onto the bottom. And the way I arrived at where I wanted it placed is I hooked up the motor, got the bead roller complete, and I took a piece of angle iron, set it on a diamond, and then I just kept moving the bead roller back and forth until I found a balancing point. The one that I made for Gene Winfield, he had a truck brake drum stand that he already had hanging around his shop, so he sent me the dimension of the hole pattern on the top of that stand, and I had to replicate that. And in doing that one, I used 2 pieces of 1 by 2 rectangle tubing, a 125 wall, and then cut a taper on each side just to clean it up, and then capped it, and then welded that in the same place, in the same balancing point on the bead roller. Mine, I built this thing many years ago specifically for the stand that it is on, and so it just required a plate, and the gearbox that I had back then, well, and now, it came off of a planer feeder, great big machine, all sorts of wheels on it. You'd put a board into the planer, this thing would clamp down on it and slowly push the board through the planer. And it just so happened it was 30 to 1, and 30-to-1 is perfect for me. The reason I use a gearbox is to get the drill motor up in a range where it has enough torque. I see a lot of guys on YouTube that'll put a drill motor or any kind of motor on their machine, even with the larger sprocket, bicycle chain, all of that, even to get the shafts to move slow enough to keep up on a fine line. I can hear the motor just dying, just trying to get up to a RPM that it has enough power to drive it. Well, if you go 30-to-1, even at the very lowest RPM of the shaft or of your dies, that allows the drill motor to get up into a workable range. I'd like to be up around 1,000 RPM. Check out what the range is of your motor if you have a variable speed, and then choose a reduction gearbox. Even if you're going to be running just the bicycle small sprocket on the motor, large sprocket on the shaft, work that out to where at a very low RPM on the shaft, your motor is up into a range, RPM range, that is not taxing it. The next thing I see quite a bit on YouTube when guys are modifying is the support that they put on the frame of their bead roller. And almost everybody uses 2-inch square and comes all the way back here down and all the way forward. And that greatly decreases the amount of space that you have to mount anything else or make a modification or have a through bolt if that's what you need. This is 3/8 by 1.5 inches, and if you look at the numbers, 3/8 solid bar stock is much stiffer in deflection than 2-inch with an 1/8 inch wall. Look it up, you'll see what I'm saying. Also, it keeps the upper part of the frame and the lower part from moving back and forth. Another thing that I do is I put this spreader in, and with this spreader I have a set of bolts here, another set here, and on the plans that I sell I have another set back here. And that does two things. Once these bolts are tight, it will not allow the frame to spread, nor will it allow it to rack. So just by having these two bolts in various places, you've eliminated two problems. And I have found that most of the work that I do is edge work. Very seldom are you going back in 4, 5, 6 inches. When I make a set of seats for a Cobra, I make the only folding back for Cobra seats. And when I make those, I have to take this off completely. I get half of the seat back from one direction. I change my dies around, turn the part around, and then I can get the other half. So at 18 inches, I can work a 3-foot piece. So when we get to the when we get to this side, I will be showing you what else this mount is for. I have a movable fence, and that bracket is what everything on this side hangs off of. So come on over to this side and we'll get started again. So here we are on the other side of the machine, and I guess the most prevalent piece is the quick clamp. This is how the stock clamp is. I just have a kingpin from a USAC midget that I keep on there that gives me a little extra length to operate the quick clamp that opens and closes the top shaft. And if you notice, there is a 2-to-1. The distance from the center of here to the fulcrum point to this point is twice. So it decreases the amount of effort that I have to put in to close the quick clamp. And if you've ever been working a piece like cross hatching or any artwork where you're constantly relocating, repositioning the piece, instead of having to unscrew the top die, you get it set to the depth that is required, and then you just open the quick clamp, reposition your piece, and you're ready to go. It's just that quick. Take it off, relocate, pull it back down, off you go. The T-handle I have knurled on one side so I can kind of keep up. Usually when I start a project, I'll put the material in between the dies, tighten this up until they're closed, until the top die meets the material on top of, or putting pressure on, the bottom die. And then I take a look at this and I know where my starting point is. I'll give it a half a turn or a turn and a half, and make a sample piece, take a look at that and see whether it's not enough or too much. And that way I know where how many turns I've put in to the piece, and I can watch the knurled side and determine whether I want to back off or add another portion of a turn. That's a really handy feature. If you haven't thought about that, think about it. The next thing is on the other side. You saw the spreader that I had. Well, that mounts the movable fence. So there's a piece coming out, a piece of square tubing, and then a 1/2-inch square shaft. On the end of that is a small piece that will go in between the two blocks. This part, just with a single thumb nut, wing nut, that will come out. Then I can move this all the way in between here, and so I don't have any restriction as to the length of where the fence can go. All right, and I only use one wing nut. The second screw here is merely for alignment. So I get that tight. I can move my fence anywhere I want, tighten it down, and I have repeatability. I think that's about it. You can see here, just by loosening this wrench, the shaft is free to move a considerable amount. So that is probably one of the best modifications to this bead roller is I can set my dies up very loosely, meaning that they don't have to be spot on. I can set them up pretty close to where they need to be, and then by loosening the top shaft, make a slight adjustment, tighten it down, and I'm ready to go. So that's about it. If you have any questions, feel free to leave your question or comment down below. Give me a call if that's what you desire to do. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe. See you later.